everyone, it is of course me down here, and today we're going to be doing yet another review on the channel. But this is actually going to be the first of a series because during I think 6 weeks time we'll finally have the new Christopher Nolan movie Tenet drop in theatres. Fingers crossed. So because of that, I'm going to be going through the film series that I've actually wanted to do for quite some time, but I've just never really had the, I guess, just the time on my hands to actually be able to make. I wanted to do this about 3 years ago with Nolan's last film, Dunkirk, but I never got time to do it because I was just too busy when that film came out. But with Tenet coming out, hopefully, we've got the time to do it now. I'm going to be reviewing every single Christopher Nolan movie from his very first film all the way till his latest film that we of course, was released with Dunkirk. But that means, of course, we've got to go all the way back to the very beginning with his very first film, Following. So let's get straight into it. So Following was, of course, the directorial debut of Christopher Nolan, who would go on to have a pretty decent career, some might say. Of course, released back in 1998, and it tells the story of an aspiring writer who follows people throughout the daytime as he learns about their lives and routines. This is until he's noticed by an individual who then invites him to take him under his wing during his burglaries to help further uncover more insight into people's personal lives. And our main character ends up getting dragged down this rabbit hole to the point where he gets knee-deep into a lot of trouble. I was quite interested going back to rewatch this one because out of all the Nolan movies, this is the one that I have rewatched the least. I have only seen this film once, and it was when I did my ranking of all of Nolan's movies from the worst to the best. When I watched Following for that time, that was the first time I ever watched the film. I'd never seen it beforehand, so I was quite interested to go back into it again and give it a rewatch to see if anything had changed in my opinion about this movie. And I do certainly respect this film in a lot of areas because if you don't know, this film had a very minimalist budget of around, I think, $6,000. It was shot on weekends. They were very limited as to what they could and they couldn't do. So I do have a lot of aspirations for Nolan and what he was able to achieve with this movie. So let's just get straight into the positives. I think the first thing that I really enjoyed about this film was the structure. I really liked how Nolan was able to take a very simple storyline, which this film admittedly does have, but be able to tell it in an interesting way, because Nolan in this film uses the technique that he's used in a lot of his movies, which is where he tells the story out of sequence. We have 3 storylines happening throughout the film that of course jump between one another and intercut between one another, and it just really helps to have the audience be invested in this storyline. And it also acted as quite a good way to kind of distract the audience from maybe some of the elements of the movie that weren't as high budget. I think in terms of being able to structure the story in this way to engage audiences to overlook those things, I think he really did a good job because it really helped keep the story intriguing, as you would always go to another scene and you'd always be trying to think in the back of your mind, where does this scene place in the storyline? It just added a major level of intrigue throughout the entire movie. Another thing I really liked about this movie was the dynamic between the main character and Cobb, who was of course the burglar who takes him under his wing. I really liked their dynamic. It very much reminded me a lot of Fight Club, with the dynamic between Tyler Durden and the narrator, and how those two very much were kind of the polar opposite of one another, but they still needed each other. That kind of, in a way, abusive relationship which kind of plays between these two characters, I thought was really cool, and it was really interesting to see. And it was just nice to see how these two ideologies, kind of how they think of things, and yet still they were able to connect through their obsession of just people and trying to figure out what makes people tick and what makes people go over the edge. It was really interesting to see that dynamic play out between these two characters. The film also benefits as well from a really fast pace, because this film's about 70 minutes long, it's barely over an hour, which means that everything is just running at such a quick speed. And because of the fact that, because the structure of the story is so broken in terms of scenes are cutting back and forth between one another, it really helps to just keep the momentum of this film going with this very simple storyline. And I always felt invested in what was going on because there was always new questions being posed to me, so I was always active in terms of thinking of what was happening on screen. So the runtime of the movie just flew by for me personally. And the last positive I will mention as well is kind of what I mentioned earlier, the methods that Nolan uses to hide the low budget of this film, because like I say, $6,000 is not a lot of money to really go around with on a film, but what he does with this is just implement really clever ways of being able to disguise it. The fact that a lot of the movie takes place in these, just rooms, never really many shots that are outside, and just the way that Nolan crafts the movie to be interesting and be engaging and to hide all of the elements of the movie that maybe were a bit lesser. I really enjoyed how he did that, and it really did just to make a movie that didn't feel like $6,000 throughout a lot of its runtime because of how efficiently it was directed and written. Now, unfortunately, that does bring me on to the negatives, because whilst I do really enjoy this movie, there are unfortunately a few aspects of the film that do fall short, and I do mainly see this as just mainly budgetary reasons as to why these negatives stand out so much. The first one I have here is the audio, and it's probably the biggest issue I have with the entire movie, because I feel like everything else is pretty good for the most part in terms of what they had for the budget. The audio, on the other hand, is unfortunately not one of these areas that was helped by this lack of a budget, because there are many times where I just really couldn't tell what the actors were saying. There was one point in the film where I ended up having to use subtitles because I just could not understand what the actors were saying or what the characters were trying to say to one another. There's a lot of background noise in here. There are some scenes where it's okay because you can tell it's been filmed in a quiet room, but when they're filming anything outside or near any background noise, you can hear it very clearly in the microphones, and it's just not very helpful when you're trying to pay attention with a movie that's told out of sequence, so you're always trying to listen into, important information. It's just a bit irritating when you just have film audio that's just not particularly very good and not helpful in being able to keep along with the story and the pacing. The acting a few times as well was a little bit off for me personally. I mean, I know some of these people have literally only acted like a couple of times since this movie. I think the actor who plays Cobb, I think this is his only film credit, and I can kind of see why, because the actor himself isn't particularly that amazing in the main role. The actor who plays the main character / Bill, he's alright, but there's quite a few scenes. There's one in particular, especially towards the end, where I felt like his delivery was a little bit flat, and there's just not really many actors in here where I saw them and thought that they really fell into their role. They were good enough, they were serviceable, but there was definitely moments where they felt a bit off to me personally, and it did take me out of the movie and out of quite a few moments that were supposed to be very intense or very dramatic, and I didn't really feel it because the acting just wasn't on point for me personally. And also, whilst I do really like the structure of this movie, it can become very confusing at times. I remember when I first watched this movie, I had a problem with the structure because of the fact that it was very hard at times to distinguish what was taking place when. And on this second rewatch, I understood it a bit more, but for me, I think there should have been more clearer ways to demonstrate the timeline of the film, because I feel like this is something that Nolan perfected with his next film after this, which was Memento, because of the fact that he had sequences in black and white and colour, and being able to use that to distinguish what was taking place at what time. Whereas with here, because the whole film's in black and white to suit the neo-noir vibe, I felt like it really harmed the film in terms of letting the audience know what was taking place where and when. So I just felt that for me it should have been a bit clearer as to what timeline we were in, just so it just didn't make it as confusing for an audience member. Not necessarily me, because I did understand a lot of the film, but there's just a few moments where I felt like, yeah, people probably won't understand what's going on here. Still, given all of that, I really enjoyed Following, and it was a very good movie. While it's definitely my least favourite film that he's made so far in his filmography, I think it's very much a testament to what you can do with very little resources for filmmaking purposes, and it definitely gives you a lot of people inspiration that you can just make a movie with no budget, because if you can make this with $6,000, it goes to show that you don't need $1 million to make a good movie, in my opinion. So with that being said, I'm going to give this movie the score of a 7 out of 10. I think it's a good film, not quite a great movie because of, like I said, the limitations that there were to it, but given what it is, I still think it's a stellar debut, and it was just really cool to see how Nolan used a lot of techniques in this movie that would come to pass in some of his biggest films ever. So getting to see that was very, very interesting. So thank you very much for watching my review on Following. Of course, this is going to be the first of a series, so the next video after this will of course be my review for Memento. I'm very excited to talk about that one because it's one of my favourite Nolan movies, but until then, I want to thank you all for watching this video. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and let me know in the comment section down below what you think of Following. With that being said, I'll hope to see you all again next time.